Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into What Got You Here Won't Get You There by Marshall Goldsmith.
Ah, yes, a fascinating choice.
It really is. And you sent over some excerpts that really got me thinking about how we view success.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because Goldsmith isn't saying that success is a bad thing.
Right.
It's more that the habits we pick up on our way to becoming successful, they can actually hold us back from achieving even more.
It's like climbing a mountain. You finally reach the peak.
Yeah.
And you're celebrating, but you don't realize that to climb the next mountain, you might need different tools.
Exactly. And sometimes we don't even realize we're holding on to these old habits, these little things, these behaviors that might have worked before. They're now affecting our relationships or how effective we are, especially as leaders.
Okay, so let's talk about this idea of the success delusion. What exactly is Goldsmith getting at there?
Well, he's basically saying that our past successes, they can actually create a sort of trap. Yeah, a mental trap. We start to believe that what worked before will always work, even when things change around us. Like we move into a new role.
So it's not just about getting complacent, but almost like we're blinded by our past wins.
Yeah. And he actually points to three main beliefs that fuel this delusion. The first one is, I have succeeded. This belief, it can lead us to overestimate our contributions and kind of downplay any failures we might have had.
Right, like taking all the credit for a team win.
Exactly. The second belief is, I can succeed, which sounds good.
Yeah, of course it does.
But this can actually make us resistant to change because we cling to those behaviors that we think made us successful.
I see, so we get stuck in our ways.
Right. And finally, there's the belief, I will succeed. It's a great motivator, don't get me wrong.
Right.
But it can also make us overcommit, take on too much, and not know when to say no.
So we end up burning out trying to do it all.
Precisely. And the thing is, these beliefs, they're often operating beneath the surface unconsciously.
That's so interesting because we might not even realize they're driving our actions.
Exactly. Which is why Goldsmith emphasizes self-awareness and being open to feedback, but we can delve into that later. First, let's look at some of those habits he talks about, the ones that even really successful people fall prey to.
You mean that list of 20 habits?
Yeah.
Reading that, I definitely felt a little called out, if I'm honest.
They are surprisingly relatable, aren't they?
You really are. Okay, let's start with one that stood out to me. Adding too much value. I think we've all been in those situations.
Oh, absolutely.
Where we felt this urge to chime in, even when it wasn't really necessary.
Goldsmith calls this the need to add our 2 cents when it's not even worth 2 cents.
Right?
It's that feeling of having to prove our worth by constantly contributing, even if we're just muddying the waters.
It's like that friend who always has to one-up your story, or the colleague who has to comment on every single point in the meeting.
Yes. And it all stems from this need to be seen as the smartest person in the room. But often the most valuable thing you can do is just step back and let others shine.
It's so true. Sometimes listening is the best contribution you can make. Now, another habit that I thought was really interesting, and I think you'll appreciate this given your work on self-improvement, is passing judgment.
This one is tricky because it often hides behind what we think is helpful criticism.
Right.
But really, it's about asserting our own righteousness rather than trying to see things from the other person's perspective.
Like that story he tells about the restaurant critic.
Exactly. Even when we know we should just enjoy the moment.
Yeah.
We feel the need to point out, see, I told you this place was terrible. It becomes about being right instead of fostering connection.
Yeah, and I think we can all relate to that urge to be right, even at the expense of a relationship.
Absolutely. And speaking of things we should be mindful of, let's talk about speaking when angry. You've been there, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Her.
Who hasn't said something in the heat of the moment that they later regretted. But what I find so fascinating about Goldsmith's take on this is that he links it back to our own insecurities.
It's not just about controlling our anger, but really understanding where it's coming from.
Yeah.
He shares that personal story about his daughter's navel ring and his reaction.
Oh, right.
And it's interesting because he has this realization while he's at a Buddhist monastery.
It just goes to show that anger can pop up anywhere, even in the most peaceful settings.
But
the key is to recognize whether we're directing our anger at the real source of the problem or if it's really about our own ego.
And sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is just stay silent.
Yeah.
It takes more strength to pause and reflect than to just react impulsively.
Okay, this next habit might be a bit sensitive for some people.
Oh.
It's claiming credit we don't deserve.
Oof. Yeah, that one. I think we all like to think of ourselves as good team players.
Yeah.
But it's easy to kind of slip into that mindset of taking more credit than we deserve, especially when things are going really well.
It's like we're subconsciously promoting ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We want to look good. We want to be successful.
But Goldsmith argues that this actually ends up hurting our credibility in the long run.
Because people can see through it.
They can. So how do we catch ourselves doing this?
Yeah, how do we? Because I think a lot of times it's not even intentional.
That's the tough part. He suggests a simple exercise. Take a moment after a success and actually write down everyone who was involved and list their specific contributions. It forces us to step outside of our own ego.
So shifting from I to we.
Exactly. Now, thinking about the habits we've talked about, which ones resonate most with you?
Honestly, for me, it's adding too much value. And also, speaking when angry, I can definitely think of times where I should have just listened instead of jumping in with my opinion.
Yeah.
And I've definitely let my emotions get the better of me in the past, which hasn't always been pretty.
Well, that's great self-awareness, though. Recognizing these patterns is the first step towards changing them.
Okay, so let's move on to solutions. I mean, Goldsmith doesn't just point out the problems. He actually offers ways to improve, starting with the power of feedback.
He really believes that feedback is essential for breaking through that success delusion we talked about.
It helps us to see ourselves more clearly,
It has.
especially those blind spots that we might not even be aware of.
Yeah. But he doesn't just say, go get feedback. He has a very specific approach, something he calls the 4 commitments.
Ah, yeah. I love that part of the book. So it's like a framework for giving and receiving feedback in a way that's actually, well, dare I say, enjoyable.
Enjoyable. I like that because a lot of times people think of feedback as this really negative, critical thing.
It can be.
Yeah.
So break down these commitments for me. What's the first one?
The first one is let go of the past. So it's about focusing on how we can improve in the future rather than dwelling on mistakes we've made.
That's like having a growth mindset, right?
Yeah.
Seeing feedback as an opportunity to learn and grow rather than as a personal attack.
Absolutely. The second commitment is tell the truth. This is about encouraging honest and direct feedback.
So no sugarcoating.
No sugarcoating. We need to create a safe space where people feel comfortable being candid, even when it might be a little uncomfortable.
But how do you balance that honesty with being supportive? I feel like that's where a lot of people struggle.
Right, and that's where the third commitment comes in. Be supportive and helpful. It's not just about pointing out flaws, it's about framing the feedback in a constructive way. Focusing on how the person can improve and offering solutions rather than just criticism.
So turning feedback into a collaborative process.
Exactly. And then the fourth commitment, which I think is so brilliant, is pick something to improve yourself.
Oh, I love this one. How does that work?
By committing to improving something in ourselves, it creates a two-way street.
I see.
It shows that we're all in this together. We all have areas where we can grow. It takes the sting out of the feedback because it's not just coming from a place of judgment.
It levels the playing field.
It does. He tells this great story about a boss who actually paid $10 for every destructive comment he made.
Wow, that's commitment.
It is. It shows that even leaders are committed to continuous improvement.
Yeah. So thinking about our listener, are they getting this kind of feedback at work or even in their personal lives?
That's a good question.
And are they open to receiving it, even when it's tough to hear?
It's important to remember that feedback, even when it's hard to hear, is a gift. It helps us to become more effective in all areas of our lives.
Okay, so we've talked about feedback.
Yes.
But Goldsmith also introduces this concept of feed forward, which I thought was fascinating.
It's a great concept. Feed forward shifts the focus from the past to the future.
Okay.
Instead of dwelling on mistakes, we ask, what can I do differently next time?
So it's like preemptive feedback.
Yeah.
Identifying potential pitfalls.
Exactly. Instead of asking, do you think I'm a bad listener?
Right.
We ask, what's one thing I can do to be a better listener?
That's so much more constructive.
It is. It's about asking for advice and guidance rather than seeking validation or criticism.
And I imagine this much less threatening for everyone involved.
Exactly. Feed forward is more about finding solutions than assigning blame.
Goldsmith uses that really beautiful Zen story to illustrate this idea of letting go of past mistakes.
Oh yes, the one about the 2 monks and the woman needing to cross the stream?
The one monk breaks a rule to help her, while the other monk criticizes him for it.
Right, and later on, the first monk asks, what woman?
He's already moved on, while the second monk is stuck dwelling on the past.
It's a powerful image. It shows that dwelling on past mistakes doesn't do us any good.
It's about learning from them
Yes.
and then focusing on how we can do better in the future.
Which is the essence of feed forward.
Mm.
Okay, we've covered a lot. We've talked about the success delusion, those habits, the power of feedback and feed forward.
Yeah, it's been a lot.
It has. But now the question is, how do we actually apply all of this? Does Goldsmith offer any concrete steps?
He does. He gives a really clear plan for making these changes, starting with focusing on just one habit at a time.
Don't try to change everything at once. Pick one area that really speaks to you and focus your energy on improving that.
Okay.
He also recommends apologizing to anyone we might have affected with our past behavior. Taking ownership of our mistakes shows we're serious about changing.
That's such an important point. Sometimes a sincere apology can make all the difference.
It can. And to really solidify our commitment, he suggests something he calls advertising our intention.
What does he mean by that?
Letting people know that you're working on a specific habit.
Oh, I see.
It creates accountability and helps others to support you along the way.
It's like making a public declaration.
Exactly. And it opens the door for people to offer feedback and feed forward. Like, hey, I noticed you're working on being more patient. You did a great job handling that difficult situation the other day.
It creates a more supportive environment for growth.
It does. And of course, he emphasizes seeking out feedback regularly from people you trust.
Like having your own personal board of advisors.
Exactly. And finally, he really stresses the power of follow-up. It's not enough to just start changing. We have to track our progress.
Stay on top of it.
He even shares his own nightly follow-up routine.
He's dedicated.
He is. It just shows that change is an ongoing process.
It's a journey, not a destination.
Right. So to sum it up, identify one habit, apologize for past behavior, advertise your intention, seek feedback, and follow up.
A simple but powerful framework.
It is. Now, there's one more thing I wanted to touch on that I found really interesting. He talks about how we don't always manage others the way we manage ourselves.
That's a good point.
We often assume that what works for us will work for everyone else, but that's not always true, is it?
Not at all. I mean, we all have different communication styles, different things that motivate us.
Exactly. What motivates one person might demotivate another. Goldsmith gives this example of a boss who loves to debate. And he assumes his employees feel the same way. But for a lot of people, having their boss constantly challenge them can be really stressful.
It's about understanding that everyone is different.
And adapting our approach accordingly.
It reminds me of what you said earlier about listening.
It all comes back to listening. Good leadership is about understanding the needs of the people you're leading and creating an environment where they can thrive.
Goldsmith even suggests writing a how to handle me memo.
He does. It's a great idea.
To give to your team.
It outlines your communication style and your preferences.
It makes things clear.
It does. It helps everyone feel more comfortable and understood. Now, I wanted to circle back to something you said earlier, this idea that the more successful we get, the more likely we are to cling to those habits that we think got us there.
Right, even if they're no longer serving us.
It's like we become superstitious about our success rituals. We wear the same lucky socks for every presentation, or we refuse to deviate from a certain routine.
Yeah, I do that.
We all do it. But the danger is that what worked in one context might not work in another.
And we become blind to the fact that we might actually be holding ourselves back.
Which is why it's so crucial to be open to feedback, to challenge our assumptions, and to always keep learning and growing.
So for our listener, what's the one big takeaway they should walk away with today?
I think the most important message is that success is a journey, not a destination.
I love that.
And that journey requires constant self-reflection, a willingness to change, and a commitment to continuous improvement.
And a recognition that what got us here might not get us to where we want to go next.
Exactly.
It's a great point. And it applies to so many areas of life, not just in the workplace. Relationships, personal goals, creative endeavors.
Absolutely. It's about staying flexible, open to new ways of thinking, and being willing to let go of those habits that aren't helping us anymore.
Even if we think those habits made us successful in the past.
Exactly. So we've talked a lot about feedback and feed forward, but I'm curious, are there any other practical tools or exercises in the book?
Oh, there are.
Because he doesn't just talk about the concepts, he gives you things to actually do.
He does. One that I found really useful was the questionnaire.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
It helps you to assess how effective you are in different areas, like communication, delegation, time management.
It's like a self-assessment.
It is. It helps you to pinpoint your strengths and weaknesses.
And then create a plan to improve.
Exactly. So you can actually take that information and create a roadmap for growth.
He also offers a lot of specific strategies for dealing with those habits we talked about earlier.
Yeah, like practical tips.
Practical tips. For example, for adding too much value, he suggests asking yourself a simple question before you speak. Is it worth it?
Is it really going to add value to the conversation?
Exactly. Or am I just trying to show off?
Right.
And for speaking when angry, he has this classic tip, the count to 10 rule.
Oh, yeah.
Before you react to something, take a moment, breathe, and gather your thoughts.
Create some space.
Create space. And he offers strategies for all of the other habits, too, like passing judgment, claiming credit, the whole list. The book is really packed with useful advice.
But beyond the tips and techniques, I think what makes Goldsmith's work so powerful is that he really focuses on the human side of leadership.
It's not just about achieving goals.
It's not just about numbers.
It's about connecting with people.
Building trust.
Inspiring them.
And that message really applies to all areas of life, don't you think?
Absolutely. It's about being our best selves, not just for ourselves, but for everyone around us.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into what got you here won't get you there, I feel incredibly inspired to continue this journey of growth. What about you? What's one key takeaway that you're going to keep in mind?
I think for me, it's remembering that even small changes in behavior can have a big impact.
It's a ripple effect.
It is. Just by focusing on one habit at a time, being open to feedback, and embracing the power of feedforward, we can make a real difference.
I love that. So for our listeners, if you're ready to start this journey of self-discovery and improvement, I highly recommend checking out What Got You Here Won't Get You There by Marshall Goldsmith. It's a book that will challenge you, inspire you, and give you the tools to create positive change in your life.
And remember, even the longest journey starts with a single step.
So take that step today. Identify one habit you want to change. Apologize for any past mistakes. Tell people about your intentions, seek feedback, and follow up regularly.
You got this.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep striving to be the best version of yourself.